Well, my name is Albin Gunnarson, and I'm working for the Swedish Oilseed Rape Growers Association. We grow oilseed rape, but it's canola quality, as you said. And I'm responsible for trial and research, and I've been working here for 15 years. We are the most north growers in Europe, and I've been working quite a lot with developing the canola production of winter oilseed, winter canola in also Norway and Finland. And we have learned a lot of growing winter canola under difficult circumstances. We used to be a spring area, and I'll try to share my screen. Well, I would like to tell you a little bit how we grow winter oilseed rape in Sweden and how our journey was to how our journey was to change from spring oilseed rape to winter oilseed rape. We used to grow about 170,000 hectares of oilseeds in the early 90s. Sweden joined the European Union in 1995, and after that we had quite bad or ineffective substitutes for oilseed rape production, and we nearly lost oilseed rape production in Sweden. But together with the industry, we made something called Svensk Raps. It's like Canola Council, and we started to improve the acreage. And in the about 2005, 2006, we had about 50% of winter oilseed rape and spring oilseed rape. As you see in the beginning, we also had a lot of spring Brassica rapa, but that's more out of the question right now. In 2014, the European Union banned the use of neonicotinoids, and then we lost just in one night about 95% of the spring oilseed rape. That also made it impossible for a lot of growers in our northern area, north from Stockholm. I will soon show you a map. But we also got new winter oilseed rape growers that shifted from spring oilseed rape to winter oilseed rape. And they are all really good growers that do everything in perfect with their winter oilseed rape, because winter oilseed rape is a crop that you have to work quite a lot with, especially in autumn. And how does it look then? If you look here at the yellow part of Sweden, here we have Stockholm. About here in the South Sweden, in Skåne, we grow about 40% of all oilseed rape in Sweden. Then we have a big belt here and out on the island of Gotland, where we grow about 40% of the winter oilseed rape production. And then we have a little bit up here. In the blue area, here we go more into forestry, so it's not so much arable land. Here we have the spring oilseed rape, and the spring oilseed rape can increase again if we get sufficient seed treatment. And if you look on the red area, it's just by the coastline. It's quite a sad development for agriculture. We don't have the grain elevators left. It's cheap land, but it's difficult farming. It's a lot of animals, but we do have some Brassica rapa winter and spring, and it's really cold up here, and it's a long winter. Of course, everything depends on the Gulf Stream. So here it's even that I think we're a bit north from you on the latitudes, but we have the Gulf Stream that makes it quite a mild climate. And here we have Denmark, and here we have the Baltic states. And I'll come back a little bit to the Baltic states and what they have for impact on the Swedish oilseed rape production. The most important thing when we grow oilseed rape is to get big plants in autumn. I believe that about 80% of the yield potential is made in autumn activities. A few years ago, we made climate maps where we have calculated back with the base temperature of 5 degrees Celsius. And if we calculate back and by the average temperature of the day, from emerge to first frost, we need to collect between 450 and 500 degrees. And when you reach 400, 500 degrees, then the plant starts to elongate. And if the plant starts to elongate, it will be exposed for winter in cold winds. It will, if you have snow, of course, it's much better. But as long as you can have the plant stay on the ground, it's quite fine. But you need to have as big plant as possible before it elongates. It's not always the temperature. We try to explain a lot of our results in trials with seeding time, but sorry. If we go back to that mirror, I must say that we have here in very south Sweden, we want to have the plant emerge by the 25th of August. Here we have coast climate. You also see that we have coast climate here up by the town of Gothenburg, and here is to the Baltic Lake. We need to have the plant emerged about 15 to 20 of August. But when you come more inland, quite a quick, when we want to have the plant emerge about 5th to 10th of August. Of course, it's okay if it's emerged later, but you don't have the same potential. And every day of later seeding, and we've done this trial in Sweden as well in Denmark, every day of later planting is worth 50 kilos per hectare. And 5 days too late, that's 250 kilos per hectare. And of course, that's quite a lot of money. So I think if you see the lakes around in Ontario, you can plant a little bit earlier, but if you work more inland, now you're between the lakes, but you see here when we are between Lake Vättern and Lake Vänern, it's still you must still plant a little bit earlier when you're out by the coastline. The distance is not too far here. So if you're more inland, you might have to plant 3, 4, 5 days earlier, and that will give you a high yield. But it's not only the temperature. We also looked at the solar radiation, and if we do this back calculation, we need, if we plant here in early August, we have the plants to emerge about the 30th of August. You see, we get solar radiation of about 12.5 megajoule per meter square. But if you have planted a week or 10 days later, and when you get your first true leaves, when the photosynthesis starts, then we're here about the 19th of September, already the solar radiation is below 10. And if we hope for a mild autumn or a late winter, we still live or get very far from the sun. So we're down here at every day we just give a radiation about 5 megajoules per meter square. Or we might not even get the first frost until December. And people think that, oh, well, it's so mild, it's plus 10, it's plus 5, but the solar radiation is too low and the plant won't grow. So therefore, it's so important to plant early, to try to collect as much as possible of the solar radiation in August, September. When it's about planting in Sweden, it's a matter of time. About 50% is seeded after mound plowing. I think it's mound plowing, when you turn the whole soil around and we go with the seedbed harrow and then plant. But that takes time. It dries up your soil. It could have about 30, 40, 50% of clay in the soil, so it's very dry. And then we have a lot of other alternatives. I don't have a picture here on the Väderstad seed hawk from Langbank in Canada, but we have other seeders. We have planters, and we have deep, it's not a plow, but it's a machine that's working about 25 centimeters deep and make a small furrow. In that, it just drops the seed, and you save a lot of moisture, but you get the quick emerge. And here you might have to wait for rain to the plant to get emerged if it's dry, and here you will save all the moisture and you will have an emerge in just a few days. And like every day is worth 50 kilos of yield. So therefore, and here we plant at the same time as we harvest. And under Swedish circumstances, a farmer has to stop his combine and start to plant. And if you go to northern Germany, a German farmer, he can't imagine, how can you stop harvesting? I must harvest my whole farm before I go to plant oilseed rape. But we don't have a chance to work that way. We have to stop harvest, plant oilseed rape for a few days, then we continue harvest. Establishment under difficult winter conditions. That here everything is about seeding time or plant emerge. The seeder that gives you the fastest emerge will be the best. We can't say that a blue, green, or red machine is better than the other. To get the plant to survive, we have under a lot of years found out that we never ever should seed more than 50 plants per meter square. We have a lot of trials that tell us that. But I also must say, when I talk to my Finnish colleagues, they are working more north, and they get an yield improvement if they plant with a higher seed density. But I think it's about something without the day length. We are quite high up on the globe when we go to Finland, and I'm really, really sure that we get into deep trouble if we plant more than 50 plants per meter square, because then the plants start to compete with each other, and that improves the will to start to emerge after 450 degrees. The plant starts to emerge when you must get this 450, 500 degrees, then something else must happen. It can be too much plant density. It could be volunteers from the pre-crop, and the pre-crop here in Sweden is mainly winter wheat or winter barley or forage. If we plant 50 plants, we might lose some under the winter because of insects, deers, moose, or whatever, but we aim to have about 30 to 45 plants per meter square in spring. We have worked a lot with autumn fertilizer, and autumn fertilizer is not something that everybody do in Europe, but when we work up here, it's essential to put on fertilizer in autumn. And 1 kilo of nitrogen is worth in autumn is worth 1.7 kilos of nitrogen in spring. So if we invest in nitrogen in autumn, we can use less nitrogen in spring. And if we use both nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and micronutrients like manganese, magnesium, and boron, we have seen that we get a significantly better winter hardiness. And of course, here, always use fertilizer with sulfur. We have made trials with pure ammonium nitrate with sulfur compared to ammonium nitrate with phosphorus and potassium, and with ammonium nitrate, phosphorus, potassium, and micronutrients. And we have seen that we get much better winter hardiness if we get affected by winter damage. We need to have such a winter where we get damages, but then you're much better prepared if you have everything of that. But then what's winter hardiness in practice? We see that smaller, sorry for spelling wrong, smaller plants die first. We used to aim to the 888 stage before winter, and 888 stage is 8 leaves, 8 centimeters taproot. I think the name is taproot. It's the main root, 8 centimeters long, and 8 millimeters root neck. And the root neck is between the white part of the root and the green part of the plant. The rest of Europe could use plant growth regulators. We have had big problems with our authorities to use plant growth regulators, but a few years ago, 20 years after everybody else, we got the chance to use plant growth regulators like it's triazoles like metconazole and tebuconazole. That makes our plants to survive winter much better if we get affected by a winter problem. But I also must say that a German farmer, he says he always have to use PGRs. We don't really see that we always have to use it, but if we get a quick start, a quick growth, then you have to feel a little bit, is this going too quick? Will my plant be too big? Then you should apply plant growth regulators at 4 leaf stage to prevent the stem elongation. If we get snow, we usually get some snow sometime in winter, but just 2 centimeters of snow will increase the winter hardiness significantly. If we have 50 centimeters of snow, that's not a problem, but just a little bit of snow, that will increase the possibilities to survive. Snow is not really a problem for winter oilseed rape. It's more like an isolation. Snow can be a problem now in March if it's too soil is too frozen and it starts to stand water on top of the soil. But that's not really common, but it can happen. We have worked a lot, of course, with varieties. in Sweden, we test about 75 different varieties from companies like DeKalb, DSV, and MPZ. That they are represented in Canada in DL Seeds. We have Corteva or Pioneer. We have BASF, we have Lima Grain, Uralis, KWS, and Syngenta. Varieties from DeKalb, they have very good winter hardiness and a strong compensatory capacity to be grown in our most difficult areas. Rapoul in Europe, they're named Rapoul or DL Seeds with DSV and MPZ. They have some varieties with strong winter hardiness. I know that you grow Mercedes. Mercedes is one of our top varieties, but they are now coming with more winter hardy varieties like Parcours, for example, and maybe Aquila. But I must say that Sweden quickly got better varieties when Eastern Europe opened up. Then the breeders in Germany, in France, and in the United Kingdom, they start to aim for the big markets in Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, Czech Republic, Slovakia, or whatever. And suddenly varieties to then our 45,000 hectares in Sweden found its way from a 1 million hectare breeding program. There's nobody who breeds for only 100,000 hectares in Sweden today. So we get the varieties to Sweden. They fit very well if they perform quite good in Eastern Europe. And I would, if you want to improve your variety testing, I think you should look for varieties from DeKalb, and they might be produced in Europe. And of course, I will try to help you to get in contact with them, because from our point of view, the best winter hardiness we can find in the DeKalb program and the DLC seeds program from DSV and NPZ. I want to show you a few pictures about autumn application of nitrogen. This was in 2008 when we started to look at nitrogen in autumn. Some farmers did put on 20, 30 kilos of nitrogen. Some didn't put on any at all. And we made a ladder here. We made from 0, 20, I don't have 40 in the picture, 60 and 80. And you see quite an effective stairway of the different nitrogen rates. And we found out that higher nitrogen application will improve the root neck diameter and also the height of the growing point. If this is the height of the growing point, we don't want the height to be over 20 millimeters. And we thought that if we put on more nitrogen, it will elongate more and get higher, but that didn't happen, and it won't happen if the plant don't reach 450 bay degrees. But we improved the root neck diameter, and a better root neck diameter, a big one, is making a more winter hardy plant. When we looked on these 24 trials with the winter survive by increasing nitrogen, we thought that we should have the winter damage up here with too much nitrogen, but we have the worst winter survive with no nitrogen. So this is a proof that you improve winter hardiness by applying nitrogen in autumn. I tried to recalculate this a little bit. It's an old trial, but we we have found out that with today, it's the same as in 2012. It's the same with the new market prices on nitrogen and canola. The optimum is 69 kilos of nitrogen per hectare at autumn. In Sweden, we're just allowed to put on 60. And in some countries in Europe, they don't have any limits, or they might just allow to put on 20, or somewhere they're not allowed to put on nitrogen in autumn at all. But under Swedish circumstances, nitrogen in autumn is essential. And we are allowed to put on 60, and all farmers do put on about 60 kilos of nitrogen. So the summary is that rapeseed should be fertilized in autumn. We have seen that it increases yield up to 20%. There are significant differences for autumn fertilization range up to 60 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. It is possible to move 40 kilos nitrogen from your spring application to autumn application, and at the same time increase the yield. And we see that in the total amounts of 180, 200 and 220 kilos of nitrogen autumn plus spring application. And then we save about, just about, should be about $50 to $100 per acre, because we don't need to, as I told you before, that 1 kilo of nitrogen in autumn is worth 1.7 in spring. In cases of late sowing, the rapeseed does not have time to assimilate the very highest nitrogen rates. We thought that we could push the plant forward with applying more nitrogen, but that's not possible. So if you plant late, it's not sure that you will have chance to pick up all nitrogen, and then you might lose it. So it's impossible to compensate for late sowing with sowing time with more nitrogen. Rapeseed sowing in normal sowing time after cereals should have 70 kilos of nitrogen for best nitrogen management. But other Swedish experiments showed that 30 or 60 kilos of nitrogen in autumn does not affect the leaching of nitrogen negatively, as long as we have a good crop. So the winter oilseed rape, like vacuum clean all the nitrogen in the soil at autumn. On the other way, it leaches quite a bit after harvest, but we have quite a lot of works that shows that we don't leach any nitrogen in by autumn application. And that was, I think, my last question. I didn't talk so much, my last picture, I didn't talk so much about weed control. I know we have quite different active ingredients to work with, but it is really important for us to treat the weeds in autumn. We do can spray with clomazone in autumn, but we also spray with something called with Arylex and Picloram in autumn by 2 to 4 leaf stage, and it's also quite good. In Sweden, we don't grow any clear field winter oilseed rape, and it's because we're not allowed to use the Imazamox in autumn. We have to apply it in spring, and the problem is that the weeds do their damage in autumn. Therefore, we have to have the fields clean from weeds, so earlier, right after emerge. And we also treat the volunteers, the grass, because I want to underline that it's important not to have more than 50 plants per meter square, and if then they do have to compete with 200 plants of wheat volunteers or whatever, to get into more problem. Okay, we have time for questions, so feel free to ask. I can see the chat.
Thanks, Albin. That's great. So yeah, on your last, sorry, on your last slide about the fertility details, we had a question. So do you consider the residual N in the soil when you're selecting a fall rate? I think that's what Brian was asking.
Correct.
Thanks, Brian.
So I understand that question. Take that question once again, please.
Yeah, so do you look at the amount of residual nitrogen in the soil before you determine how much nitrogen you're going to apply in the fall?
No.
Okay. Any reason why not?
It's because we have a lot of straw residues, and though they will immobilize nitrogen.
Yep.
We don't plant. The pre-crop is grain, and then it's not a lot of nitrogen left in soil. We know that field peas is a good pre-crop, but that's a bit too don't take care of all the possibilities in your crop rotation. We have quite a long crop rotation. I didn't say that, but we don't grow oilseed rape more than every 5th to 6th years to prevent the development of clubroot. And that's really, really important for us. That's because we have about the highest yield of oilseed rape in Europe. It's because we have so clean soils.
That's a great point. We do have clubroot here in Ontario, and we don't have clubroot resistant winter canola varieties, and we do want to make sure we're aware of that going forward.
There is quite a big breeding of clubroot resistant varieties in Europe, but we are not sure they are so winter hardy, but there is alternatives.
Right. And similar to, I think what you said for you, we are planting after cereals as well, typically after our fall planted wheat. Typically, we've recommended doing some tillage to manage residue, and that's mostly to manage slugs. And there was a little talk about strip till in the chat here, but one question in the chat is, what are your typical winter survival numbers? So did you say you had 60% survival, or you're hoping for better than that, or
95?
Okay, great. Yep. And we've talked about this a little bit, but lower seeding rates and lower populations around that 50 per meter squared help with getting the plants to that large size and helps with overwintering.
If you know what you're doing, if you have a good seeder that you can plant less seeds, I could advise you to plant 40, no problem. And if you go down with the planter to plant 20 or 25, then things start to happen. If you have flea beetles, if you plant 20 plants and you have a flea beetle, that flea beetle destroy 2 plants, then you have 18 left. And then you get a deer, it takes 2 plants, then you have 16 plants left. That's not a lot. If you have 40 plants, the slug takes 2, the flea beetles take 2, and the deers take 2, then you still have 34 plants per meter square. and that's a big difference to 16 or 14. So we need some extra plants to be destroyed by insects or slugs.
Yep, that's a good point. I have, as you say, seen with actually a European style planter or drill on 5-inch rows, seeding as low as, it was like 3 plants per square foot, so just around 30 per meter squared, and they seeded it nice and early, and it looked great. I don't think I'd recommend that to everyone, but that
you need to have a good weed control as well.
Right. So some of the dates you're talking about, we're looking typically around closer to the 1st of September for planting timing. And for that reason, we have less flea beetle, because usually by then they're already in their overwintering sites. We also still do have access to neonics, and the seed is typically treated. So I've seen the occasional little chew mark in a plant, but generally speaking, so far, flea beetle has not been a problem in the fall planted canola.
Chew marks is not a problem. And if you have a neonicotinoids, it's no problems with the flea beetle.
That's right. Now, we do not have any plant growth regulators registered for use in canola in Ontario, but that is something that I would love to see some research on and maybe move towards registration. We use plant growth regulators in our wheat crop, but I can see this helping us. If we had those in place, we could plant a little earlier, get those plants nice and big, but not elongated before the fall.
Yeah, but it's important to know that it's not the same plant growth regulator in cereals like in the oilseed rape.
Yeah.
And it's not all triazoles that work. It's metconazole and tebuconazole.
Great, thank you. What specific micronutrients impact winter hardiness? So would you consider the crop deficient in those micronutrients or?
Yeah, you can read in the books that boron is important. I have never ever seen any damage from boron deficiency, even if we do trials in low boron content in the soil. But when we take plant samples, we often see manganese deficiency. We usually spray manganese when we plant spring barley or spring wheat. So I'm not surprised that we find manganese deficiency. We also can find manganese deficiency if we plant with something that loosens up the soil quite a lot, so we get oxygen in the soil. And if you don't, you could use a roller to push back the soil a little bit. That will also prevent a little bit of manganese deficiency. But manganese deficiency is quite common, and if you apply manganese, it do improve yield. We have made trials of that.
Interesting, great. One question in the chat is, do you ever have cabbage stem flea beetle or other foliar feeders like we do in Canada? So what kind of insects?
We have the flea beetles. We have the cabbage stem flea beetles, but in Europe we have I think 3 different species, and we don't have the big one. The big one is more dangerous. We just have the small ones. The damage could be quite scary. Could be quite scary, but they don't have an impact on yield so much. Slugs is a problem. When we don't mix winter and spring oilseed rape, we get less problems with pollen beetles. And we used to have huge problems with pollen beetle when we had 50,000 hectares of spring oilseed rape and 60,000 hectares of winter oilseed rape, and a big mix in the middle between these two areas. but that's more clean now, so that's better. We got problems a few years ago with seed pod weevil and the pod midge, and we have a work going on that. We don't know why they arrived, and we don't know why they are gone. But there was about 50% yield damage in some fields. It was terrible.
That's frustrating. Yeah. So for our participants here, we have not yet identified pollen beetle in Ontario, but I will be looking for it this year, and I believe it's been identified in Quebec and in the Maritimes. So that's something to watch out for. It's about the size of a flea beetle, more or less, kind of similar looking, but located in the flower buds.
It's not the same flea beetle that you have in spring oilseed rape.
No, I was just saying it kind of looks similar in terms of if you're looking at your crop and you see a little black beetle in your flower buds. But I have some information on fieldcropnews.com about that. So one question in the chat, and we're looking for more questions if you have them. So in our winter wheat crop, we underseed it to red clover. So after we harvest the wheat, the red clover is there, and it's a legume crop, of course, that fixes nitrogen. Is that something you ever do in the canola? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, we have tried, but don't. We have tried, but we don't have any clear results if it's a good or not. I have one question here. What crop does canola typically follow in Sweden? And the crop rotation is winter canola, 2 times winter wheat, and then maybe field peas, flax, and then 2 times winter wheat again, and then winter canola. That's how we get to like 6 years crop rotation. Some go on 4, some grow winter barley as pre-crop, and then but the winter canola is always followed by winter wheat.
Great. Well, until we get more questions, I have a couple. So it looked like your spring application rates were from 180 kilos of nitrogen per hectare up to 220. Is that right?
Yep.
So for us, that's like 160 to 190 pounds per acre. That seems on the high side. What are your average yields, I guess, is the first question. And then do you see lodging of the crop where it kind of flops over with those really high N rates?
We have made a work where we go out in autumn and cut 1 meter square of the green part of the plants, and we weight that with and measure how much the weight is, and we have a calculation. So from that we can calculate the spring rate application, and altogether that makes that a Swedish oilseed rape should have 235 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. In Germany, that's about 250 kilos per hectare. And those 235 to 250, they should come from soil mineralization, autumn application, and spring application. And we do have situations where we don't need to put on fertilizer in spring on the winter oilseed rape. Some don't dare to do that, but the normal spring application today is about 120 to 150 kilos per hectare. So this work has lowered our use of nitrogen. The processors now talk about it's not enough protein in the meal. We don't get paid for the protein content, so we don't care.
Right. Makes sense to me. Yeah, those numbers sound a little more aligned with what we've been recommending. So what are your average yields? I'm not sure if we talked about that.
About in Sweden, it's about 3.8 kilos per hectare. In the south, it's more. It's about 4.2 maybe.
Tons per hectare?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So that might be a little higher than what we see so far in Ontario, but we're still refining how we grow this crop, and we've certainly seen some high yields, at least on some acres, and we have a yield challenge which has helped us kind of promote the yield potential of the crop.
We could have better yields, but in Sweden we have problems with verticillium since 1950 or something, and that costs us about a ton per hectare.
Interesting. I had a grower ask a question, and I admit I had support from Brian Caldbeck on answering it, but when you go out to put your spring fertilizer on, what kind of equipment are you using? And if you use really wide tires, say we have some 3-wheeled fertilizer application equipment, are wide tires a problem running over the plants, or should you use your narrow tires?
We use about one standard tire, about 750 millimeters, 650 to 750 millimeters. We don't recommend to go out with twin tires. We don't have triple tires in Sweden, but we have, I think we have a more wider wheel than you have when I've seen pictures from North America. So about 750 millimeters. And then the most common tram line is 24 meters. 36 is coming, and
that's the width of the application boom, right?
Yeah, but we don't have booms. We don't have booms. I don't know the name. We have discs.
Oh, okay. So it's granular fertilizer that you're applying?
Yeah.
Okay. So we do have some liquid products that we're using in the spring, and and maybe others on the call can speak to it, but I think sometimes we can see a little leaf blotching with the liquid fertilizer, but usually it's not a yield problem. If anyone has any questions related to that, and anyone else on the call want to speak up with answers or ideas, please do. I know we have some great agronomists on the call here too. So you're putting sulfur on in both the fall and the spring?
Always sulfur together with nitrogen.
Excellent. And what is the total amount of sulfur that you're applying at those yields?
Well, it's about 1 sulfur to, in practice, it's about 1 sulfur to 10 nitrogen.
Okay.
The recommendation might be 1 sulfur to 5 or 1 sulfur to 7 nitrogen, but there is trials done with more heavy sulfur application, but we have not been affected the yield. So as long as you have 1 sulfur to 10 nitrogen, I think it's fine.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to.
It depends on your neighbors what they burn in their stoves. We have a lot of coal in Germany,
right?
But it's not like before. We need to fertilize with sulfur. It's really important.
Yeah, this is the last 10 years we see a decline in atmospheric sulfur deposition, and we're definitely needing to apply more So that's a good point. So what percentage of your total sulfur do you apply in the fall versus spring? Or do you have a general number? You just follow that ratio?
Yeah, we follow that ratio. Yeah.
Okay, great. So in the spring, basically our recommendation has been to, first of all, make sure your plants are healthy and they've survived the winter and you have a good, an appropriate population, and then go ahead and put the fertilizer on as soon as you can after you've determined that. So is that kind of the same recommendation for you?
Yeah, when the winter oilseed rape production was not so big up north in the Stockholm area, we didn't want to put on fertilizer until we saw that the plant had started itself. We don't want to kickstart the plant with fertilizer, because then we can start it too early, and it will, if we get a backslash with the weather, we might get very cold and the winter damage. It's not so common anymore. We might have had a change in climate, so life is more simple. But a bigger plant or a bigger crop doesn't need fertilizer very early, so you don't need to hurry, and the plant is quite good to pick up the nitrogen even if you put it on a little bit later.
Right. So,
and there were a question here if the winter crop is using the nitrogen fertilizer efficiently, completely in the fall.
Right.
Yes, it does. Because when we cut this meter square of green biomass, the normal uptake is about 100, 120 is not unusual. So it takes from what it gets from the soil plus this 60.
Great. Yeah, I think you said with late seeding, sometimes you're not needing those. Yeah, you're not able to utilize or shouldn't apply those higher rates of N.
Yeah.
Okay. Brian has asked if you use fungicides. So are you applying preventative white mold fungicide? Yeah.
Our main problem is Sclerotinia. So we mainly use one application of a fungicide. We don't have problems here in Sweden with Forma, Leptospirella. So it's mainly Sclerotinia that's the problem, and I think winter is doing quite good to us. We have much less pressure from fungus and insects than in France or United Kingdom, Germany. So as long as we have winter, it prevents some fungus attacks and insects attack. But today we advise, with these prices that we have on canola, we advise that every farmer should treat their fields with a fungicide in full flowering, because it's so much to lose.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask two questions, and then we'll have Alex share his presentation. So the first is, do you think that varieties have a different potential to elongate in the fall? So
yes, they have.
At
Absolutely.
a given, okay, so at a given seeding date, some may elongate before winter and others will not.
Yeah, and you have to ask the breeders about that information. We don't really have time to scout that in our trials. When we try 75 varieties every year, and 35 of them we never see again. They don't come back. They come 35 new. So there is differences. I know that the Calbas work quite a lot, and they have like 2 breeding programs, with one that elongates earlier and are better in late conditions. But our seeding window is so narrow, so it's not really time for farmers to choose variety after when you know when to plant.
Right.
You have to you have the best varieties, you have to order the seed in by midsummer.
Yes, same here. Yeah. So I don't know if I feel like with Mercedes, I don't feel there's as much risk of it elongating in the fall. I mean, we don't have much to compare it to, but based on what I heard about history of winter canola in Ontario, I don't feel like the risk is as high with Mercedes.
No, it's a slow growing plant.
I think that's good for us.
Yeah.
Okay, and one more question for now, although there will likely still be some time. So I was recently walked a field. It's a bit early to be scouting right now, but I thought I'd go play in the mud a little. And it was all kind of heaved. All the plants were popped out of the soil, and that field will likely need to be terminated. So what are some of the things that cause that other than soil type? We've heard that vertical tillage might contribute to that popping out of the soil. So where we have vertical coulters and we're not turning the soil over, that's what I mean by vertical tillage. But I also wonder, it was very wet after seeding. So does that mean the roots haven't grown as long because they didn't need to because it was wet, and so the plants are not as well anchored?
Yeah, if it's very wet after seeding, you don't get so developed roots. When we see plants is popping up, it's mainly on very organic soil.
Yeah.
So that's a bit difficult to get them to sit there, actually.
Yeah, we try to tell growers to choose their fields wisely and not clay soils that hold on to water. That's where we're more likely to see that heaving. Okay. So please feel free to continue to type questions in the chat. I'm gonna get Alex, if you don't mind, to share what you came on to share for us. You should be able to share your screen and kick Albin out.
Yep, we'll see here.
Oh, wait, stop. Sorry.
No worries.
Can you see that there?
Yeah, it's not quite full screen, but it's there you go.
They're there now. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Megan, and great information, Albin. Thank you. I'm Alex Zelem, agronomist with C&M Seeds. I primarily cover the southern end of the province and down into the Niagara Peninsula. We covered a lot of great information here, so I won't get into it too in depth, but we'll just go over a few things here quick. So some of the challenges we've seen in Ontario, and Megan's touched on this already, slugs for sure. We have seen quite a few frosts in the spring. From what we've seen, the Mercedes does seem to handle it quite well from what we've seen in varieties in previous years. We talked about planting date. You know, the folks in I'd say the central part of the province, or Harrison, that area, probably that last week of August is generally the planting date. The folks down in the south, you can get away with a little later into September, some early October, but I think you have to have a good fall and choose your field pretty carefully. One of the biggest challenges we've seen is hitting your target seeding rate. I'll touch on that in a minute. Rotation, the best has always been fall and wheat, which we've talked a lot about here. So some of the rotations that we've seen work well would be soybeans, then wheat, followed by winter canola, then potentially wheat after that, followed by cover crop. That could be one. Another one could be corn or soys, followed by cereals, winter canola, and wheat. Another one that, and I'd be curious to hear from the folks on the chat here today. We've talked a lot about double cropping soybeans after winter canola. I'd be curious if many have had that opportunity. I know in some years, the winter canola is harvested right around the same time as the winter wheat, and even later in some instances. So I'd be curious where, if any folks have actually had the opportunity to double crop soys after winter canola. again, pick your fields well tiled. You got to watch out for water ponding issues. You got to be able to get the surface water off. Heavy soils can work, but again, you got a good tile underneath. So the biggest thing is with hitting your seeding rate. So the seed is sold by the live seed count. So our goal is to hit 250 live seeds per acre, which gets us into little over 5 plants per square foot. So when you get your seed, we give you on the tag, it's a guaranteed germination. So to hit 250 live seeds per acre, it ends up being, in this particular seed lot, 2.43 pounds an acre. And that's certainly on the smaller side. We've had some seed lots up to 4 pounds an acre. But the biggest thing is the cost does start increasing quite a bit if you can't get relatively close. So if you hit around 3 pounds, it'd give you about 300,000 live seeds per acre, and then it gets you up to about $71 an acre. This is last year's pricing. I just pulled it off of our price list just for demonstration purposes. And then obviously if we get above 3 to 3.5 pounds an acre, you're hitting that 350 live seeds, 350,000 live seeds per acre, and it gets you into that almost $84 the acre range. And we can take questions on this and come back to this if anyone has questions there. The other thing is ordering. We got to get the orders in early. The seed originates from Germany. It takes quite a bit of time to get. So we want to have orders in by June 15th to guarantee availability. We can take them afterwards, but we can't guarantee the seed will be here on time. So that's pretty well it. Yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to ask.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but still hoping that you'll share some questions.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
When you're talking about planting soybeans after the winter canola,
yep.
When is time for harvesting that?
Great question. Growers on the call are welcome to speak up. I know I've seen one crop that, by the end of October, the soybeans were still a little bit green in the field, but typically we're harvesting soybeans. Double crop soybeans will probably be October, November. Anybody want to chime in on their double crop experience?
I know for the local Essex County, I know for ourselves, usually we're 10th, 15th of November for double crop beans, which are 2.7 relative maturity, usually is what we double cropped. But I do know a grower in Lakeshore that double cropped 2.0 or 2.1 maturity, and he was still in October when he harvested double crop beans.
Yeah, and the real key with success there is good rainfall right after seeding those soybeans, of course. So go ahead.
We don't desiccate our winter canola. We go for direct cut. So we might be a little bit later than you, and then we improve yield. We get higher oil content. Right.
Yeah, I think we see both. It seems like with the winter canola, there's a little more desiccation happening, or it's fairly common, but you certainly can harvest without pre-harvest herbicide. But yeah, most growers kind of want to get it over and done with because they have other crops that they're managing. So we have a question: what are the best chemical rotations that limit herbicide residual effects with winter canola after soybeans? So, I mean, we do have our guide to weed control that has all the carryover or cropping restrictions. I honestly, personally, am not super familiar with what's being applied in soybeans. In dry beans, any of those group 2 products are a no-go. They have a 2-year carryover restriction. If anybody wants to speak up about the herbicide programs they're using, please do. Like, what else are we putting on in soybeans that are a problem? Metribuzin, that's, I think, a no-go for winter canola. I think I know what is a problem and not what is not a problem because I don't work in soybeans much. Certainly Roundup is not a problem. And we can talk again, Sean, in the future. My colleague, Mike Cobra, is good at this stuff. Any other questions? We have lots of participants, but you're a little quiet. I'm not sure I have any questions any other questions at the moment. Oh, so somebody asked about incoming varieties and research. I would say it's a little like chicken and the egg, and I don't know if Alex wants to talk about it, but it's hard to predict where our winter canola acreage will go, right? A lot of the growers that, maybe not most, but a lot of people growing winter canola now are kind of new to the crop. And so C&M has been in this game for a while in Ontario, and their experience in the past has been, really up and down acres, and it's difficult to gauge what kind of investment. I mean, I shouldn't speak on behalf of C&M, but I think that's a difficult situation to gauge their investment. We do have to register varieties, and it has to be a Canadian registrant that does that. And so we haven't had a lot of interest. I am the chair of the committee that is involved in registering varieties. So we're thinking about maybe making some changes to that system. And I do have a meeting with CFIA coming up, but as you likely know, making changes to that system will take a few years. Ellen, I see you turned your camera on, and I feel like that might mean you have something to say.
Well, I was just going to chime in, Megan, that,
Sure.
Yeah, from bringing new varieties in, certainly, the acres expanding last year will help with interest from breeding companies to even bring things in, but just limited on abilities to test. Like you said, we have to come up with certain amount of agronomic data and a few other traits, and it's just difficult to gather that information to meet those registration criteria. So as you mentioned, working on maybe trying some changes to that to make it a little easier to bring new varieties in. But right now, yeah, that's the challenge on introducing some new genetics.
Thanks, Ellen.
That's always a problem on small markets. We see that as well in Norway or Finland.
Yeah, well, and we have about 45,000 acres of spring canola, and there are piles of spring canola varieties, but only a handful are available to our growers. So we're kind of familiar with that story. Someone is asking for an update on the winter canola crop in Ontario right now. And is it too early to tell? So yeah, I think it's fair to go look at your winter canola right now, but I think it's a little on the early side to be making decisions anyway. We're still going to have some cold weather and warm up and then cool down again, and that will potentially affect that crop. I have only looked at 2 fields. I talked myself out of going to look at another one yesterday because it was like -8 when I got out of bed. So, and there was still snow in the field. So, but the 2 fields I looked at kind of near Tilbury, one I mentioned was all kind of heaved out of the soil, and I think will need to be terminated. The other field was, had some standing water, and I couldn't really walk all the way across it without being up to my eyeballs in mud, but it looked pretty good, and especially the larger plants, and there was the plants were well anchored. So I feel optimistic about that field. I know that we had wet conditions after seeding or around seeding in the fall. So there could be other fields that are looking kind of tough. We had some growers try some no-till, and it was completely decimated by slugs because they like to eat it as soon as it comes out of the soil. So they can do a lot of damage in a short time. And what was the other thing I want to say? Fall armyworm. I'm not sure where all we had fall armyworm. It's an infrequent pest in Ontario. And because we had late frost this year, the frost didn't kill those fall armyworm, but I did see some fields in Chatham, Kent that were basically decimated by fall armyworm. So we had over somewhere between 11 and 12,000 acres seeded, but I know that we will not be harvesting quite that many acres this year. And Sean is in Eastern Ontario and mentioned theirs is still under snow. So we do have a little bit happening in Eastern Ontario. I think Sean's an agronomist in the Winchester area, so that's kind of interesting that we're having some success out there. So a question on double crop. We were not able to grow double crop soybeans after canola due to too much water and canola being harvested late. If we did have the chance, could you plant corn the year after? Okay, so the question is related to corn after canola. So I do have an article on that rotation issue. If you grow canola, there's not really any arbuscular or mycorrhizal fungi left in the soil. And so that, because canola doesn't host that soil fungi, it's not available for corn, and corn needs it to explore more of the soil and get adequate phosphorus. So we do see sometimes phosphorus deficiency in our corn following canola. So if you plant a crop like soybeans, double crop soybeans between the corn and canola, that fungi have time to get going again, and you shouldn't have a problem in your corn. If you put a cover crop, maybe an oat crop between the canola and the corn, then that's excellent as well. If it's fallow, I don't know that we see the fungi regenerating. If there's a lot of weeds, there could be some of that regeneration, but it's kind of difficult to estimate the risk of corn after canola with nothing grown in between. And I know who asked the question, and I can send you that article. But I guess the recommendation is don't do it. Don't grow corn after canola. There could be a risk of phosphorus deficiency, and delayed maturity is the real issue in your corn. So someone asked, if the canola is terminated in the spring because it isn't worth saving, can you recrop to corn? And that's another good question. And I'm not sure if I have a great answer to that. I don't really know that anyone has had that experience. You don't grow corn in Sweden, do you, Albin?
No, not in the same areas as we grow winter oilseed rape. So we don't have that experience. Maybe you can find it in Germany. But when it's about winter damage, I would like to say that a big plant, a small plant die first. The big plant can be quite damaged, but it can start to grow. And it's, as long as you have plants on every meter square, or at least every meter foot, you will probably have a yield that is better than replanting with another crop. If you're a bit unsure if the field is dead or alive, you can by this time go out and pick a plant in and put it in the window and see if it starts to grow. And if it starts to grow, the field is all right.
Yeah, there are a few things we try to look at with health of the plants in the spring. We do sometimes cut the plants open to see, sometimes the stems look fairly hollow, and because of winter damage, and then we know that the yield potential is lower. And there's lots of time to plant corn in April after we make that decision. So I don't know that I could say that it's better to leave an unhealthy canola crop instead of replanting to corn. But yeah, you're right. We can get away with fairly low canola populations and still have strong yields. In fact, I've recommended growers terminate fields, and then they went on to do well in the yield challenge. So we don't give up too early on canola. But again, yeah, corn after spring, after terminating winter canola in the spring, I don't really know what to say, and I guess my recommendation would be not to do it, but if you contact me, we can talk about it further. So thanks for your question, Daryl. Someone asked about shallow planting being the cause of canola heaving. Yeah, I guess if you seed it very shallow and it's very close to the soil surface, you don't maybe have as much root anchoring, especially if those plants didn't get very large in the fall. But the field in question, like the field I was talking about, it was seeded at 1.25 inches. So that's about as deep as we want to go. Sorry, I should have used centimeters there, Albin. How deep are you seeding your canola?
25 millimeters.
Right. Yeah. So 1/2 inch. Yeah.
Yeah, 1/2 inch.
I know we're Canadians, but we still love talking in inches. So, but we understand the millimeters. Okay. There are a few more questions here. Has anyone ever tried buckwheat as a cover crop or weed control option before going back to winter wheat? So you mean harvest your canola, plant buckwheat, and then winter wheat? Stuart, is that?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. If just to see if you could like choke out some of that volunteer canola before you went back to winter wheat.
So if Albin or anyone else on the call wants to offer.
Can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, so he's looking at after a crop of winter canola is harvested, and you tend to have a lot of volunteer, we call it volunteer, yep. Planting a cover crop like buckwheat just to choke out the weeds and then go back to your fall planted wheat. We have a good month, I guess, of time there.
You should never let the volunteers to develop true leaves, because then it's the same like growing canola after canola, and you will improve the chance to develop clubroot. I think here you have talked quite a lot of moisture and water in the fields, and that's very problematic when it's about clubroot. When you plant your winter oilseed rape, we plant often in quite warm soil, and if it's at the same time it's wet, we get these 20 degrees and free water, and we get perfect infection possibilities for clubroot. And that's even worse when you have harvested your winter oilseed rape in July and you leave the volunteers, you have 20-25 degrees, maybe more, and water. Then you have the perfect conditions for develop clubroot. So therefore, we would like to kill the volunteers by cultivation or Roundup. Yeah. So be aware of volunteers of winter oilseed rape.
Yeah, I'm glad you keep mentioning clubroot, because I don't think it's as much on our growers' radar as it maybe should be. We certainly do have it in the province. Yeah, I'm not sure how fast buckwheat grows in terms of, I mean, are cover crops excellent at controlling weeds? I'm not sure. And so yeah, that's a tough one to answer, I guess, Stuart. There's a question, so maybe Albin can help, but maybe some of the other people on the call. So prioritizing harvest. We've assumed that canola would come off the field earlier than winter wheat, but the last couple of years, the two crops have matured at the same time. And it's a logistical challenge for growers, especially with storms and the risk of sprouting and lodging. So does anybody have any comments to offer on the challenge with those two crops coming off at the same time? I will say pre-harvest herbicide in the canola might help you harvest that canola quicker. Of course, getting rain on a crop that's been desiccated can cause more problems, or that you may have shatter losses, especially if you use a true desiccant like Regulators. I know some growers have had this issue in sort of Wellington County. Anybody? I don't know if there is an answer other than it is very difficult to manage. I guess not. Yeah, so we do kind of anticipate canola will mature faster. I think last year, especially, the weather kind of went backwards on us. We all thought early on that winter wheat was going to be excellent, and then we were like, oh, maybe it's not. So yeah, weather is a big factor in the maturity of those two crops, of course.
And I did hear, Megan, when some got back to, after some of those rains got back to their winter canola, it was extremely dry. Yeah, I think I've heard some was down to about 6% moisture
Right.
at harvest.
Yeah, I agree. That's part of the challenge too. Yeah, we want to harvest. So we want to deliver grain at 10% moisture, especially if it's a warm day. We can start at a little higher percent because it will drop a few points during a warm day. But yeah, I have heard people harvesting as low as 6% moisture, which is leaving a little bit of money on the table. Sydney suggests we can maybe push canola harvest a little more than we have been. With the help of a desiccant, we might be able to push it even more. So yeah, especially for growers that are new to canola, that harvest timing is sometimes tricky or stressful. Okay, well, we're coming to the end of our kind of time slot here. Albin, I really want to thank you for joining us. I know it's in the evening there, and you said you had another event going on. So really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and share your expertise. And Alex, of course, thanks for giving us a little touch base with C&M Seeds. I don't see any last minute questions here, but if there is any, speak now or forever hold your peace. And of course, you can reach out to me with questions. So go to fieldcropnews.com for articles on corn after canola, and just search canola on there. You'll find some other stuff, pollen beetle as well. Yeah, and I look forward to working with you guys this spring. If you have canola in the ground now and you need help or want help looking, assessing that crop this spring, I would rather be in the field than at my desk. So please reach out. And I guess that's it for now. Any last words, Albin?
Well, thank you for being able to participate here tonight, and I wish you good luck with your winter canola. It's a fantastic crop with huge potential, and I think you can develop and improve the growth of winter canola in Canada.
I agree. We appreciate your support. All right, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.